Last week, the internet went potty for a new Jaguar which you won't be able to buy for a few years and will be £100,000. Now, I think we should be getting much more excited about this car, which is the Škoda Elroq. It's a family-sized electric SUV, which is kind of affordable, and I think it's going to be a big seller. So does it deserve a place on your driveway? Let's take a drive and find out. We're big fans of the Škoda Enyaq, but it's a little too large for many people, which is where this Elroq comes in. It's around 4.5 metres in length, making it a rival to cars like the Nissan Qashqai or Ford's new Explorer, or maybe the new Kia EV3. It's basically an all-electric successor to Skoda's best-selling Karoq, and interestingly it's going to match that car for price too, starting at around £31,500. That's at least £1,000 less than the key rivals. The entry-level Elroq 50 has a battery capacity, this is the net, of 52 kWh. The Elroq 60 is 59 kWh, while the Elroq 85 uses a 77 kWh battery pack. That 85 has an electric range of 360 miles, the 60 is 258 miles, and the entry-level 50, 260 miles. The version I'm driving today is the 85, which has 285 horsepower going through the back wheels. It's a single motor only, even though it's only got 15 horsepower less than the four-wheel drive version with two motors. So it should be quite exciting. It's also got the 85 kilowatt hour battery. Although Skoda says it's 85 kilowatt hour, it's actually only 82. But that's still pretty decent. Now that means that it's quite quick, really, as you'd expect, and the steering doesn't have any of that kind of pollution, of that kind of the power from the front motor. So it does feel slightly sporty, but it's not a sports car. It's not a hot hatchback or a sporty SUV. It's got quite a relaxed feel. Now this car's riding on the 20-inch wheels, which look super bling. Now they do give it a slightly rumbly ride, but it's not as bad as you might expect. I'll be tempted to go for the 19s because I'm old and I prefer things like a nice ride at my age and being able to ride over potholes, but that's up to you. You might decide to go for the 20s. I wouldn't blame you. Probably gives you a little bit less range as well, but it's not too terrible in terms of the ride. There are different drive modes and they do seem to affect the steering and the throttle response by quite a large degree, really. In comfort, the steering feels a lot softer and a lot more relaxed. I quite like it, but normal is a decent compromise. It does have a little more feel through the steering than it did when I drove a prototype one, so perhaps they listened to me. It's still, though, not a sports car. I can't emphasise that enough. If you want something sportier, go for a coupe or Born. But this car, I think it's got a really nice balance of driving excitement and refinement. Now brakes, you've got a B mode down here, and you've got paddles which give you two different regen modes too. It's not hugely violent. There's no like one pedal driving as far as I can tell. No, that's not going to send you through the windscreen if you lift off the throttle, but again, it's nicely judged. Something which is also quite refreshing on this car is the visibility. I mean, these mirrors are huge. They're like my ears when I was at primary school. If you look at my old school photos, they're enormous, which is rare on a car like this because normally they shrink the mirrors because of the aerodynamic efficiency. But it's really refreshing to see you can actually see out of this car. You can see the front of it too. The back window's decent, and there's a rear wiper. That's not necessarily a given these days. And you've got all the cameras, of course, as well. But I don't know, it's just quite refreshing to be able to see out of a car properly. Now, putting that 285 horsepower through the rear wheels does have some compromises. And I'm quite surprised, actually, because I'm in the normal mode. I'm not even in a sports mode. But if you pull out of a junction, and it's perfectly dry at the moment, and it's not like a gravel junction, and you put your foot down even kind of 3/4 of the way because you want to get away quickly because there's a car coming or something, the traction control kicks in quite, I wouldn't say violently, but it's noticeable the traction control's kicking in. And that's quite rare on an electric car because the electronics normally are able to control it much more than they are here. It feels quite old school, like when traction control was first invented. Strange, but who knows, they'll probably fix it in some software update in a week. So I'm out of town now, so I'm going to try it in sport mode and see what happens. Now, ooh, it really is quite fast. I don't know if you'd need the 300 horsepower version unless you need the four-wheel drive. Now the steering's got a little more responsive too. There's a little bit of vagueness, I suppose, around there, but again, it's not meant to be a sports car, is it? Something about the brakes though. Generally, if you just tap them, it wipes off the speed okay. It's not the bite you might expect, but if you need to brake hard, there's a bit of softness about the brakes I'm not quite sure about. Perhaps when they bring in the real hydraulic brakes rather than using just the regen, there's a bit of a delay, but I'm not quite as happy about that. It's not dangerous, they're not going to the floor, but it just feels a little bit spongy. When you get to a corner, there's a little bit of body roll, because this isn't meant to be a sports car. Just enough to put you off going too quickly, I'd say, or maybe tempering the enjoyment a little, but hey, it's not bad. This is a family SUV after all. I think it's pretty well judged in terms of the handling. And of course the 20-inch wheels mean it's got loads of grip. This Elroq 85 gets faster charging as it's able to accept DC at up to 175 kilowatts. The Elroq 50 and the 60 support charging of 145 and up to 165 kilowatts respectively. This car was also fitted with the optional adaptive chassis control, which costs £650. It adjusts the suspension responses based on the road surface, and it makes the ride even smoother or the response is sportier. It works well, but we suspect most drivers will be happy with the standard setup and just save their cash. This car has a lot of power, obviously, and I reckon, I can't believe I'm saying this, it would probably suit this car a little better if it had a little less power. So my advice is try one of the other versions with the smaller motor or less power before you plump for this one. I think it will be just as enjoyable, really. I suspect most buyers will be happy with the cheapest 50 version, or maybe treat themselves to the 60. I also tried the lower powered 50 and it feels perfectly adequate in most situations and only becomes a little breathless on faster sections of motorway inclines. But I reckon the 60 will be more than enough for most drivers. In terms of screens, I've got this one in front of me here, which is probably smaller than most smartphones these days, and it's got a lot of information packed on it. It's got the speed information and the speed limits too, and a route guidance window and battery level. Now, if you normally wear glasses for reading and you're a little bit older like me, you might need them to look down at that, but I don't suppose you can complain because a lot of the important info is duplicated on a head-up display. The speed's nice and big, the efficiency information's there on there and you can change that, and the speed limit. Now my efficiency at the moment, if you're interested, I've only been driving around local roads so far, it's 5.1 kilometers per kilowatt hour. I've also got this bigger screen here, which isn't the biggest in the business, but it's perfectly adequate. Now down at the bottom here, I've got some permanent buttons to do things like go between the music and the navigation, and also sort out heated seats and if I want the ventilation to be on a bit more. But below that and below a set of vents, there are proper switches, proper physical, not touchscreen switches, which turn on or off the driver assistance systems. And I've got one to change the modes between the 5 different driving modes. There's something to do with the automatic parking, which nobody would ever use. Hazard lights, a locking button, climate control, go to there, maximum defrost, and the rear defroster. So proper switches. Now, talking of proper switches, you know how lots of cars in the Volkswagen Group have those haptic buttons, which everybody seems to hate on the steering wheel. This doesn't. This has proper switches on the steering wheel here, including these nice knurled aluminium ones here that give it a quality feel. And over here, there's 4 proper electric window switches. Now, even the new Audi A6 has haptics over here, so quite how Skoda got away with that, I'm not sure, but I'm glad they did. The rest of the interior has a pretty much a good quality feel. It's certainly up there with the Volkswagen and perhaps beyond it, I would say. There's this nice metallic feeling door handle here. The door pulls themselves, but you touch every day. Well, they're a bit hard, but perhaps they need to be hard wearing, I don't know. Now this one's a sport line, which I think gives it this kind of sportier, I suppose, looking black interior with some natty blue lighting here. I might like one of the lighter interior finishes to give it a bit of a lift in here, especially this headlining, which is a a bit dark and dingy perhaps. If you want to know more detail about the Elroq's interior, there's another walk around video featuring Nikki. The link's in the description. In the back, well, it's shorter than an Enyaq, but you wouldn't really notice here because there's plenty of space. The floor's not too high, and look at this legroom. I'm 5'8", plenty of headroom too. It's a little black and dark, but it's not too bad. And the materials, well, there are a couple of scratchy bits, but there's some nice metal feel door handles. Okay, so let's have a look in the boot. Now, it's a reasonable size, but there are some really clever bits here, which is a bit of a Skoda thing, really. So, first of all, the cables, they're here below the parcel shelf, so you don't have to take all your luggage out when you want to get your cable. Brilliant. There's also this hammock, so you can put your shopping bags in there, and you don't find your tins of beans rolling around when you open the boot when you get home. And then you can make this into a different level here, so you can put things underneath, keep them safe and stop them from getting crushed. Also, a nice protective plate there as well when you've got muddy boots or perhaps a dog. It's okay. In terms of size, the spec sheet says the Elroq has 470 litres of space with the seats up and 1,580 litres when they're down. That thrashes the Volvo EX30's 318 and trumps the Ford Explorer's 445 too, but it's beaten by the Kia EV3's 485 litres. So the Elroq isn't really a rock star. It's not a car which is going to break the internet, especially in the way it looks. It's perhaps a little generic. Someone last night suggested it'd make a good undercover police car. But in every other way, it's really well judged. It's got good pricing, it's efficient, plenty of space, and some really lovely design features. The way it drives too, I really like it. It seems to have been tuned for sort of refinement rather than getting an extra second a lap around the Nürburgring. And on Britain's broken roads, that's going to be a real boon. I think that it's a car that I'd really recommend. I'd happily recommend it to my neighbours, my friends, anyone. In fact, the only problem I have with it is that the Kia EV3 is also pretty good. Now that's going to be an interesting twin test when we get to do them together in the spring. So like and subscribe and we'll see which comes out on top.